being prepared, I think by now he's already in the tomb, and the tomb is already being sealed because they were rushing so that the Sabbath must not be broken. So as we're speaking right now, Jesus is going to be going into a 3-day of rest. 2 days, then 3 days actually, and then he resurrects on Sunday. Now that is the thing we know. But I want to go back kidogo, because tomorrow what we're going to be doing, why are we doing it? Why do we do this thing in consistent scale? Every time we are in church, every 3 months, we do this thing, we wash each other's feet. But I want us to tell this story from a perspective now of looking at it from the point of insight. What is Jesus trying to tell us? My key text comes from, I know everybody's wondering why Luke is the key text I'm looking at, but we will be focusing on Mark. But the key text comes from Luke. And it comes from Luke 4, 18 to 19. And this is the introduction of Jesus Christ to the world when he walks into the temple. And he takes out a scroll and unrolls the scroll and reads it in the synagogue on a Sabbath day. And this is the word he says: "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to release the oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Introduction, Jesus has just come in. And Jesus has come in for the first part of his mission, and the first thing he's telling us in the temple is he refers us back to the book, to the words of a prophet, and says that it is him proclaiming. He has come to fulfill these things. So what is he coming to fulfill? Let's go back to the book of Mark. And I want us to go to the book of Mark, and we start from chapter 12. And from chapter 12, or let's go to chapter 11, at the book of Mark chapter 11. And what we have in the book of Mark chapter 11 is Jesus has started preparing himself. He's in the Mount of Olives, he's in Bethany. So we know one thing: Jesus is in Bethany, and we know exactly where he is. Jesus is in Bethany at Lazarus' place with Mary and Martha. That's why we know the family from Bethany is. And Jesus starts making a journey, and he's telling these people to go prepare and go look for a colt. Mark talks about a single colt. Matthew talks about a colt and a donkey. And somehow Matthew keeps on giving us two. In every story where there's one demoniac, Matthew has two. Every time. We've never understood why Matthew seems to be seeing two things in every point. But somehow Matthew has a way of telling a story and relating the story back to prophecies. So in the prophecy, it was a donkey and a colt. So that's a prophecy of Zechariah. But let us look at this thing, and I want us to start thinking it from this point. Why do we do these things every 3 months? Why do we just wash feet? What is this that we are trying to do? But Jesus is trying to tell us one thing. There's something that I'm always afraid of. It's called mechanical Christianity. And if we are not very careful, that every 3-4 months we come and gather and we wash each other's feet. I know most of you. Which one? Mguu. So that kesho mkitoa mguu mbele ya watu haikai mbaya. And we do this always. We make sure, kesho ni Holy Communion. Wacha nivae nini? Wacha nindafute mguu mpya. So we become so mechanical, we forget the purpose. Jesus says he has come to proclaim. And I want us to look at these words very carefully. The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to preach good news. Which good news? Salvation to the poor. Which poor? The poor in spirit could be the first group of people. The blind in spirit could be the people he's talking about. The prisoners in spirit are the people he might be talking about. And Jesus is telling us something. And that's why I want us to go to the book of Mark, and we see something interesting developing. Jesus has arrived on Sunday and started, it's after the Sabbath, he starts his action. This is the time Jesus announces it is time. Most of the other times people want him to do a miracle, do many things, but Jesus is not saying, he's always saying, it is not yet time. But for this one, this time, he's prepared his people and he's telling them, it is time. It is time for him to go and die. It is time for him to go and fulfill the will of his Father. It is time. And Sunday has reached. Jesus has one big problem aching him this week. And in this week, first thing we need to see is Jesus hanging low. And the first thing Jesus chooses, instead of coming like a king, he comes like a lowly king, just like he introduced himself. As he introduced himself, he introduced himself in a manger. And the next thing we see him is on top of a donkey, and not a donkey, a colt, a very young one. And this is what he comes with. And people give him, instead of diamonds and things being thrown, it's only twigs and palms and leaves and maybe anything you could find, including grass. Now, if you are coming from our community in Kisumu and those areas, if I throw grass on you, it's not a good message. It is something that you feel is cursed. Someone has committed suicide, you unakata mnatupa. It's a bad thing. So Jesus comes in and introduces himself into Jerusalem, and people are celebrating, and the people are celebrating because they knew and they had seen what he had done. How was he sending his messages back then? He was healing people, and healing people, then he goes, tells them not to speak. But this is the crowd that is coming to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is full. And the first place Jesus wants to go to in that first story. And that's why I want us to focus on the book of Mark, because the book of Mark tells us he arrives, and in the next morning, meaning Jesus on Sunday, just had one function, traveled to Jerusalem. And in the book of Mark it says in the next morning, he goes to the temple. And the first thing he's going to show us about this important week, we call it temple. You can be there. The temple is full of money changers. Trade is going on. And the first two people Jesus is going to get rid of from the temple are not the money changers, but the ones who are selling and the ones who are buying. What were they selling and buying? They were selling and buying things that they're going to be using for the Passover that is going to be on that Wednesday. They were preparing themselves for the Passover and doing this trade within the church, within the temple. They were coming there with the high levels, and it is in these high levels that when Jesus is talking about, I have come to proclaim sight, I have come to give the poor had no access to those particular places. And the money changers were there, who are the second group of people they cleared. Jesus' message is, you are too high for people, calm down. And as Jesus is leaving the temple, he's hungry. And as he's going, Mark tells us something interesting. There's this beautiful twig tree that is there. And Jesus is hungry, and he goes to take a fig to eat. But the tree doesn't have fig. Mark tells us something interesting. The rest don't tell us this, but Mark tells us it was April. It was not the season of the fig. But as Jesus walks away, he says one statement, that nobody will ever take a fruit of the fig from that tree. And the Bible says, in the last line, it says, and the disciples were puzzled, were amazed. They heard it. Why were they amazed? Jesus wanted to get a fruit from a tree on a season that the tree did not produce fruit. Question, are we this beautiful tree, filled with beautiful words, prepared with everything, but we are not productive? Or are we only productive in the season that suits us? Jesus is asking this question by the time he's questioning the fig tree. We move to the next day, and in the next day, the curse is effective. As they are walking, Peter is the first person who notices the fig tree has died. Jesus is telling us something simple. When we are too high, the fig tree is not productive. When we are not productive, then we are better. We are not productive, we are better off dead. That is the message of the week. And every day Jesus is telling us something and reminding us and taking us back to where he introduces himself, that his own business is there to come to proclaim freedom for the prisoners. Prisoners in bondage. In bondage of which one? In bondage of sin and the world. Jesus is telling us to get away from our comfort zones and be like low-hanging fruits, accessible. Because somehow, maybe as we're getting to this message, as we're coming to tomorrow, as we're coming, we forget some simple things. That when Jesus invited his people, he knew where he wanted them to go. It's not that Jesus assumed that there'll be someone waiting with something on the top so that follow her, she'll show you where we are going to be. He had prepared himself and knew who you could talk to. You'll see a lady at this particular place carrying this firewood, go to her, tell them where is the master's room. He had prepared. How many times do we, after we've gotten our message, prepare for the people that we are targeting? How many times do we prepare for the people we want to proclaim this message to the poor, to the blind of sight, to these people? Who are we talking to? Who do we preach to in these churches? In every moment that we spend our time here in church, every 3 months, we have our communion. We take the divide. We take the bread. We wash feet. But we make sure we wash feet that have been well manicured so that we don't. And new socks, so that it doesn't smell. Question. Jesus invites them. And Paul says something. That after they had eaten what? The Passover. They had done the Passover activity. It was over. The breaking of bread was not done during the Passover. The Passover festival was done. The feast was eaten. He prepared the Passover and enjoyed the Passover with them. Because the Passover was reminding them of their journey into the first salvation, where they moved from Egypt to the promised land. But this time he had something special. And it was coming after they had eaten the Passover. Now the Bible doesn't show us the way we do things here. We wash each other's feet. But the Bible doesn't show us any point where the rest washed Jesus' feet. Jesus tells them to go down and he's the one washing them. Lowly king. Like a low-hanging fruit, he makes himself accessible. Because Jesus is trying to tell us one thing. With the message that we are going to be having, then we become servant leaders. Not leading servants. Not leading leaders. But servant leaders where we go down. We started off with a donkey. We started off with, we come to the middle of the week, there's unproductivity from beautiful things. So we might be looking very beautiful, but very unproductive. But Jesus is telling us there's still chance. There's still hope. So he's giving us our next example. Sit down. Let me wash your feet. Now here's something. It's the desert. They are full of leather sandals. So there's a likelihood that the feet of someone like Peter was smelly, considering he is a fisherman. There is a likelihood that Judas was the cleanest amongst them because he seemed to be complaining so much about how money is spent. But they have walked in the desert. And in those moments when you're in the desert, if you know very well, if you've walked in sandals for around a few days, definitely miatokas and the rest of these things begin. Though we're talking about very cracked legs, and Jesus just goes down, doesn't care how dirty they are. Because as we become lowly servants, as we are doing this particular service, we don't choose who we want to do. Jesus has 12. Amongst the 12 that he's going to be having, one is just about to betray him. He knows that. But he's going to perform the service that he brought him there, to proclaim freedom for those in bondage, to open the eyes so that they may see, and all those particular things. Jesus is just having this journey to tell them that this is the story that is about me. This is why I came. I didn't come here to rule. Remember, let's go back. Some minutes before the journey, there's an argument, there's a conversation. Let's not allow him to go. Some days before, there's this conversation about who's going to be taking the side seat, who is going to be the most important, who's going to be the minister of trade after we overthrow Jerusalem. What are we doing after tomorrow? How is tomorrow meant to be an impact to you by just washing each other's feet? Is it routine? And are you going to do it again 3 months from now? Our brothers and sisters in the Catholic Church may do it every week. They are not wrong, because Jesus says do it repeatedly. So it can be 1 hour. You can still do it. But for what purpose? For what gain? For what understanding? What do we understand when we do these particular things? Because Jesus has gone down on his knees and he's washing the feet, the dirty feet of his disciples, showing them the examples that when I came from heaven, and the serious dirt I'm going to be cleaning is I'm taking every person's sin, which is filthy dirt, and it's going to be mine, and I'll carry it on a cross, and I'm going to die for your sins. You just need to bring your fruits lower so that it can be accessed by the shortest of the people, by the lamest of the people, by the blindest of the people, so that this message can reach them. Today I just want to ask you one question. Have you been reading the Bible correctly? Have you been seeing what the message of Christ is all about? Because even as a baby, the very first message we see is a simple king in a manger. Even as he grows up, we see the first message he says that he is the fulfillment of prophecy of removing people from the bondage of sin, from the blindness of sin, from the imprisonment of sin. Maybe you've been reading this thing thinking about today, the Spirit. Let us read the verse again. That is Luke. I want someone to read it for me so that it stays in your head. Someone, Luke 4:18 and 19. Oh. Jerry, read it for me, kidogo, so that people can remember this one. So, and read it from the point of understanding now. Luke 4:18 and 19. And we'll go bit by bit, then I'll close at that part. Anybody who's found it, who can? You've seen it? Okay, read it.
The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. Stop there.
To proclaim what? And what is this good news? Salvation. To who? Jerry?
To the poor.
Number one, to the poor.
He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners.
Which kind of prisoners are we having? Prisoners who are bound by the world. And we are here doing this particular exercise. Like low-hanging fruits, we should come down and bring the fruits to the people. Tomorrow's exercise is not a simple job. Tomorrow's exercise is a reminder that we should be out there proclaiming a message to release freedom for the prisoners of sin, to recover the sight of the blind people who do not see what the world is all about and do not see that there is salvation coming their way. Because that is the year of the Lord's favor. Which favor? The favor is us who have the fruits. And if we continue putting our fruits where the fig tree was putting its fruit hidden, or too high, like the temple the way it is, if you continue only serving and cleaning the feet of the cleanest people who've manicured their nails and even as gone as put a kidogo ka nail vanish, you are doing the wrong business. The business that we are here in church to do is simple. Proclaim the year of the Lord, which is really anointed with 3 things: releasing the poor, freeing the prisoners. Every person should have access to the message. Today we are being asked to do this. Go low. Take a towel, kneel down, wash the feet of the poor. Show them love, because Jesus was showing us something, that love is the message. Even love to an enemy, even the love to a person who's just about to destroy you. 2 people in that room were going to be struggling. One will be denying before the cock crows 3 times. Another will be betraying. Gear to the place that it can be accessed by the people who are short of faith, people who are lame of faith, people who are blind of faith, people who do not know the message. If it's not about them, then we better not do it. Because in the same book of Isaiah, God tells us that he's tired of our blue moons, he's tired of our Sabbaths, because we have forgotten. We have forgotten the poor. We have forgotten the widows. Some of us are